Hey guys, what's up? It's La. Welcoming ya back to another episode of Walks with Schla. And something I just thought about that was pretty interesting was because we talk a lot about human kindness and human empathy. And I don't really think this issue I'm gonna provide is all that relevant, because believe it or not, even nowadays, treat others the way you want to be treated doesn't really hold as much weight as it should for obvious, it's an obvious moral. I guess I was about to say for obvious reasons, but I don't know that really, it's not, I don't think the reasons are very obvious at all. Like, that's kind of what's sad about it. Treat others the way you want to be treated makes more sense than just about anything, really, right? About any moral or any issue or flaw with humanity. Although even that, that's something we could look into later after I say what I'm about to say, because I guess you could make the argument that there are cases where somebody should not be as treated as good as you, particularly when it comes to kindness and deservingness. Do all souls deserve equal, or do all souls deserve what is needed to them? It's interesting. But anyways, what I wanted to talk about was this pretty interesting concept about kindness, care, and empathy, and the problems with that. Because the truth is that you could have somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing is mean because it doesn't personally affect them, right? So if somebody, for example, really cares about food, and they would be upset if their food was gross, then they may go out of their way in their life to be extra polite about that specific thing. That's a terrible example. Let me come up with a better example. Let's say somebody got really upset anytime they were talked over. They would go out of their way in their own life to make sure they don't talk over others. If somebody was really disgusted when somebody burped, they would go out of their way to probably not burp as much. You see what I'm saying? I want to even say potentially yawning, because there are some people where I feel like yawning is taken as rude. So they might, just because it affects them so much, they're going to go into greater lengths to not do the behavior themselves, but it's only because it hurts them, so they're more aware of it. Whereas plenty of people aren't bothered by certain things, and then those things that they aren't bothered by, they don't care about. Even though they might be rude. And so what happens is you have a society that is further and further individualized. TikTok feeds that everybody has a different feed. More and more time in isolation. Instead of spending time with the people in their immediate surroundings, you're spending time giving a bunch of attention and affection to random people on the internet. We're becoming hyperindividualistic. And this means that things that are seen as rude or not are becoming more and more less commonsensical and more subjective, more and more harder to understand and harder to comprehend. So you end up having people where they might get offended or upset about something but they can't really explain why. They don't really know why, and it's not necessarily objective as to why they end up like that. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting conundrum. Is that the right? Because it's something that people don't really think about. And of course I think about it, but nobody ever really thinks about this. And so most people, they go through life, and at least in the past, you never really needed to think about this because most people were relatively similar. So whatever manners were fairly universal. And so it was, again, a lot easier for people to become friends or to get into relationships or things like that, because overall people had broader interests and perspectives and ideologies. They were pretty broad, pretty similar. You still had individuality, but manners were kind of similar, and everybody kind of revolves around the same general precepts. But now everybody is so different, and so you have certain people that hyperfixate and get significantly upset over very specific things, and then not over other things. And oftentimes these are things that the person may just react unreasonably to without really understanding why, and it's probably because they never thought about it. Like in my case, I usually think about the things that I feel, and so I attach reason to them. I usually reflect, and you've seen it on this show, on how I feel about a certain thing or why I feel a certain way, and try to reason it. And the problem is most people just never do that. I mean, if they want something or they like something, they just leave it at that. And they engage with or don't engage with the things that they like or don't like. I think a lot of people fail to understand that there is still a logic to emotion as well. I think maybe that's a scary concept for a lot of people, but everybody's emotion does have a logic, whether or not they're consciously able to interpret or extrapolate it. Like there's still something in your brain going on, and so it's a super important concept to understand this. But most people don't. I think most people probably go through life and, again, just loosely assume people are at a relatively similar cognitive capability or memory or level, roughly, and they never really think about just the extremes and the diversity and variety of how other people interpret information, or just where they're at cognitively or things like that. A lot of times it's uncomfortable for people to think about these subjects. It's very common that people like to think that they're nice or they're kind and things like that, and everybody's equal, because that's such a feel-good philosophy. But it gets scary, because you really don't want to think that there's a hierarchy to humans in terms of potential for output, especially potential. I mean, a lot of people's potential is not utilized properly, so that's kind of its own issue. But I think you could honestly make the argument, if people were actually employed efficiently and education was given to people with the highest potential and things like that, you could actually use that excess productivity to compensate better for the have-nots. You know what I mean? But we're seeing in developed society less of an interest in education or excellence and more of an interest in the lower level traits of humanity. And I'm assuming that's due to technology and how the flashier and the brighter things are more stimulating and impactful for people. So that's what's paramount now. That's what's most interesting is, you know, who's the flashiest, who's the loudest, not who's the wisest. And so you even have people who are far below who idolize the people above, idolize the wealthy, essentially. And that's pretty interesting, right? Because they're likely never to achieve that, and yet we still have this inherent bias to idolize it for ourselves. I think a lot of people never even think about it. They never really think about sustainability or whether it's fair or things like... I just don't think a lot of people care that much about fairness. And then you've seen that compound over time where it's just been more and more easier for there to be such disparity between the have and the have-nots. And that's kind of what you're getting to now, where it's just it's so severe at this point. And it's proof of humans' lack of awareness. You know, you kind of have to think about, even in my own life, what happened to me to make me feel this way and think this way? Because there's not really a reason. I don't know. I feel like almost anybody who would even get to the point of thinking the way I do, you would have to go through some kind of trauma or something. And I can't really remember or recall any events that happened that really caused that. I almost just think I have had such a desire for just good human interaction, and then just never getting it because of how this world is. And it just really hurt me a lot. And so really, you know, for the past little bit over 10 years, you know, because when I was a child, a lot of this stuff wasn't as big of an issue, because I do think in retrospect I was wiser than my peers, and there was always kind of a little bit of a disconnect, but I didn't really look into that too much, and I just assumed others were similar. But again, I was also still a child, and it's a child is just a child. You know, you don't really deal with a lot of these problems when you're a child. But yeah, if anything, I do kind of have an interesting story in that regard, because my intelligence, or my way of thinking about things, it was not... I think I was always smart, but there were definitely kids who were smarter than me. You know, I even say this, I've said this multiple times on this show, it doesn't really feel I mean, I guess I was always a thinker, but I think there's a difference between being a thinker, being into philosophy, and then actually getting, nailing things, actually striking bullseyes. You know what I'm saying? I think there's a difference between those two things, because I was always, since I was about 14, a deep thinker and a deep philosopher. But it's really only been, it's taken nearly 10 years for me to finally feel now at this point, I think that my head it's actually screwed on straight. Things are actually making a lot of sense to me. I attribute a lot of that to AI. AI being basically the perfect outlet for me to channel my information into giving me lots of things to read. I've been reading more, obviously reading the prompts that AI tells me, and just all the research that I do. Like, I always did research, and I was always better than other people. And that's actually funny, because I was worried that AI was going to diminish my strength, because I was so good at researching, and I thought, oh no, like AI is going to come along and now I'm not going to have anything special anymore to say about myself. But I'm failing to realize that, again, not really how it works, because most people I know can't even use GPT properly, like if they had to. So there is sort of an accelerant where if somebody's a fast reader, if they're good at reading, AI furthers that, or it's useless. And I do think we're at the point now where a majority of humans can't even use AI properly. So this is kind of the problem, right? And it's such a moral issue, and it's just this like huge issue, but most people are just not they're not able to keep up with the amount of progression we have. I mean, it's been this way for a while, but I think it's very stark with AI. The way I use AI and GPT, to be generous, it's probably in the top 10% of its use. And I would say at least 60% of GPT's use is probably just mostly nonsense. Like, there's a lot of people wasting the bandwidth on junk, and they're just not really interacting with it right. People have like flawed opinions or incomplete perspectives. Even if somebody gets a piece of information right, they may not really know the nuance of it and stuff like that. So how do you square that for humanity and moving forward when we're so behind? Like, we've actually created systems and technology that nobody is able to actually execute properly. And so, yeah, I'm not worried about it anymore, because nobody can use GPT as well as me. It still takes a human that is good with language to get into that. Even this conversation, I just don't think that many people could do this, could have this type of a conversation for this long, and that they would be able to do it by themselves and just record it, transcribe it, paste the text into GPT, because this transcript, it's riddled with points, it's riddled with questions. I deserve some credit, because a lot of people just wouldn't do this. They couldn't do this. And again, it begs all these ethic and moral issues with humanity. And why am I working a super low wage, barely able to skate by? Now, I know other people too who are pretty smart, but they're stuck, they might not even have a job. And then you have people who are dumb making six figures. I mean, that's got to be fixed. We have to have, again, our brains need to just be uploaded in public information, and then they can be screened out and grabbed, and we can have this great reshaping of society where, good people end up at the top. And things would change pretty fast. But yeah, it is interesting to think about. The technology that exists now is far beyond what most people can ever even feasibly use. I mean, the CPUs are so fast. The phones, the computers, everything is just so good. It is way beyond what most people can even fathom. But for me, it's we're kind of there. I think we just about got there, but for most people, it's it's been this way already. We're really reaching this limit, a perceptive limit. And it's important. It's obviously this very important, interesting thing that occurs, But again, what do people use it for? Playing games, fooling around. A lot of people may see their contribution to society as just, and humanity as just working. Just some like silly little job. And that's not even, that's like not even the half of it. And that's always the thing I'm trying to say. I mean, I work, but that's just a piece of the puzzle. I mean, if you're a human, you need to be dedicated to keeping up with the news, keeping up with politics, holding politicians' feet to the fire. Nobody does this, which is why we have the problems we have. But I'm saying people are so stupid that they act like them just working a job, and then they can just like play a game in their free time or something. Like, there's no time for games. I've already said it before. I've called for a moratorium on entertainment and pleasure. And then once we start to fix these things, holding our politicians accountable, holding the business leaders of America accountable, then you can go back to a controlled entertainment apparatus, you know, but nothing too crazy. Like, we can't be having too much fun that we lose sight of the important stuff. So I've called for that already, but yeah, it all is what it is. But yeah, I don't know how this conversation stemmed from the subjectivity of empathy when there is an objective to empathy. It's not like there isn't. But, you know, that is what it is. It's like, what can you do about that? Just all silly. It's all crazy, all silly. And, I mean, what else is there to conclude, you know? I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that it's been schla, and now it's time to buy schla. So, see ya schla.